"You're only here for the food," my son said, loud enough for every face at the long, candlelit table to hear. I had not even reached my chair when the laughter spread, brittle and knowing. My name, Iris Caldwell, 74 years old, a widow who once owned the little Potterian gift shop by the pier, was nowhere on the embossed place cards. Daniel Caldwell, my eldest and only son, stood at the head of the table, flawless in his dark suit, smiling as if he had told a clever joke. He ran 3 high-end restaurants across the coast, and tonight's dinner was at his newest, a place dripping in imported marble and glass. I pulled out the chair at the end, the one without a name, and sat. Lydia Caldwell, my daughter-in-law, swept past in a silver dress, whispering greetings to guests, her bracelets chiming like a soft alarm. She bent briefly toward me, eyes warm but voice cold enough to chill the wine. "We had to make space for the investors," she said, and moved on. Her talent was in delivering insults with a smile that photographers adored. Chef Antonio Russo emerged from the kitchen, the guests clapping for him as if he were a headliner. Tall, trim, and still carrying the warmth of southern Italy in his accent, Antonio had been a familiar face in my shop years ago when he bought handmade serving bowls for his first restaurant. Tonight, he was Daniel's showpiece. A partner for some venture Daniel had been keeping vague. The plates were set with gold-rimmed china, heavy with the smell of truffle and garlic. I noticed the servers carried not just wine but slim folders, sliding them discreetly beside certain plates. One such folder landed in front of me. My fingers brushed the cover. It bore no logo, just a thin strip of paper with my name handwritten across it. Inside was not a menu, but an invoice payment for the night's exclusive tasting and consultation, billed to me. The amount was the exact figure I once lent Daniel years ago to save his first restaurant from collapse. I closed it without comment, my mind steady, my pulse slow. Around me, conversations swirled. Daniel lifted his glass and began a story about the family's humble beginnings. "We started with nothing," he said, looking toward the far end where I sat, "and built everything you see here by grit and vision." There was no mention of the winters I kept the heat low so his bills could be paid, or the summers I stocked his pantry with my own groceries. Midway through the meal, Daniel beckoned a small boy forward. My grandson, Evan, 8 years old, shuffled to stand beside him. "This," Daniel said to the investors, "is the future of Caldwell hospitality." The boy grinned, unaware of the theater. Daniel's hand rested on his son's shoulder. "He'll carry the name forward." He paused, then with a smile just shy of mockery added, "We all know Mom isn't up for business matters anymore." It drew a polite chuckle from the table. I caught Evan's puzzled glance. I smiled at him, though it felt like lifting stone from across the room. Lydia was already leaning toward one of the guests, her voice pitched low but audible in the quiet moments between courses. "We just want to make sure she's comfortable, that she doesn't have to, manage things she can't keep track of." Her hand fluttered vaguely, as if dismissing a harmless eccentric. The guests nodded, eyes flicking toward me with a softened pity I didn't ask for. When dessert arrived, Antonio himself placed a plate in front of me, 3 small custards in porcelain cups I recognized instantly. They were mine, or had been. The glaze pattern, a swirl of cobalt waves, was the same I had designed at 18, one of the last pieces I made with my mother before she passed. I had given that set to Daniel as a wedding gift. Seeing them here, in Antonio's hands, made the air tighten in my chest. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Antonio said warmly. "Daniel tells me we can replicate them for the new concept." I felt the weight of every listening ear. The cups were not just tableware, they were part of the lease agreement on a small commercial property I still owned. That lease had a clause, one Daniel didn't know I remembered, tying any reproduction of the design to my approval as landlord. The clinking of glasses signaled another toast. Harold Bennett, the town's business association president, rose to speak about partnerships and vision. As he talked, Tommy Carter, my late sister's grandson, tall and eager, slipped into the seat beside me. He had been scarce lately, though he once visited weekly. "Uncle Daniel's got big plans," he murmured, eyes shining, "but he needs you to sign something first. It's just a formality." He slid a folded document toward me under the table. "Better to do it now, before people start leaving." I unfolded it enough to read the first line. It wasn't a formality. It was an authorization for Daniel to act on my behalf in all matters concerning the property tied to those cups. My gaze lifted to Daniel, who was clinking glasses with investors, oblivious to or confident in my reaction. The room smelled of burnt sugar and wine, laughter swelling around deals I hadn't agreed to. I set the paper down and let my fingers rest on it. Outside the tall windows, the ocean was black under a sliver of moon, waves folding in and pulling away. I knew then the current was turning, and not in Daniel's favor. I didn't sign, not yet, but I smiled, the same quiet smile I used to give difficult customers in my shop. They always thought they had one. That was the first mistake they made. The second was underestimating how much I remembered, and how well I knew the fine print. Chef Antonio Russo returned to the dining room just as coffee was being poured, his crisp white jacket unmarked by the hours in the kitchen. He carried a leather-bound folder under his arm, and Daniel rose to greet him with a handshake that lasted long enough to draw everyone's attention. "We're making history tonight," Daniel told the table, and his voice had the smooth assurance he used when closing a deal. Antonio glanced toward me, the barest flicker of recognition crossing his face, but his smile remained fixed for the investors. I sipped from my cup and kept my eyes on the exchange. Years ago, Antonio had stood in my shop doorway, 20 pounds lighter, asking if I could rush a set of serving platters for his first menu. I had stayed up 2 nights to fire and glaze them. Now he was here as Daniel's ornament, his accent and reputation seasoning the pitch as much as any food. A server appeared at my elbow and set another folder before me. This one bore Daniel's embossed restaurant crest, not my name. "Just some formalities," she murmured, already moving away. I opened it halfway. It wasn't a menu or a thank you note. It was a vendor agreement between Antonio's catering company and a shell corporation I didn't recognize. The signatory line was blank, but the printed name beneath it was mine. Daniel began speaking again, weaving a story about the Caldwell brand expanding into bespoke culinary experiences, pausing to let Antonio describe the vision in lyrical Italian phrases. Investors nodded, their pens scratching across check slips and pledge cards. Lydia circled the table, a refill here, a hand on a shoulder there, leaning in to murmur encouragements that were as much for show as they were for persuasion. My eyes kept returning to the vendor agreement. The address listed for equipment storage was the same as my small commercial property on Dock Street, the one with the long-standing tenant who paid in cash every month and never missed. The lease on that space was ironclad, with a clause that forbade subleasing without my written consent. Whoever drafted this agreement intended to bypass that entirely by attaching my signature to their own contract. Antonio reached the head of the table and placed his folder beside Daniel's wineglass. "For your review," he said, his tone practiced. Daniel tapped the cover once, then looked toward me. "Mom, I'll need you to initial a couple of things before you go tonight," he called across the room, the easy familiarity in his voice masking the command beneath. "Nothing complicated, just to keep the project moving." Several guests turned to look at me, their faces open, expectant. I nodded once, the kind of nod that could mean agreement or simply acknowledgement of having heard. Daniel smiled, satisfied, and moved on with his pitch. As dessert plates were cleared, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway leading to the restrooms. The air there was cooler, the noise muffled. I pulled my phone from my bag and scrolled to Elaine Porter's number. Elaine had been a customer for years, buying wedding gifts and anniversary bowls from my shop. She also happened to be one of the shopper attorneys in the county. I sent her a photograph of the agreement's first page and the address line, adding only, "Call me when you can." When I returned, Harold Bennett had taken the empty chair beside mine. Harold, with his deep voice and easy laugh, had been president of the local business association for as long as I could remember. He clasped my hand in both of his. "You must be proud," he said, gesturing toward Daniel. "This is going to put Caldwell on the map." I studied his face for any hint of doubt, but he seemed convinced, perhaps even invested. "I'm proud of a great many things," I replied, my voice level. "Some of them have nothing to do with maps." Harold chuckled, perhaps taking it from modesty, and began telling me about a recent development grant the town had received. His words skimmed over me. My attention was on Lydia, who was leaning close to Tommy at the far end, her hand on his arm as she spoke quickly. When Tommy finally came my way, he was carrying a narrow envelope. "Aunt Iris," he said. He'd always called me that, even if the family tree made it more complicated. Daniel just wants to streamline things so you're not bothered later. Sign this, and he can handle all the paperwork for Dock Street. He slid the envelope onto the tablecloth. It's just an authorization form. I didn't touch it. You've seen the form? I asked. Sure, he said, though his eyes flickered. It's nothing, really. I smiled at him, a small, tired smile. Nothing has a way of becoming something in the wrong hands. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable, and mumbled something about checking on dessert. The evening wound down with more toasts, more handshakes, and the quiet shuffle of agreements being gathered into briefcases. Daniel made his way toward me, Antonio. At his side, before you head home, Mom, Daniel said. Antonio and I thought we'd walk you through the plan. It'll be quick. I'm sure it will, I said, rising. My hand brushed the leather-bound folder still on the table, the one with my printed name beneath the empty signature line. I slid it toward me. I'll take this home, read it in the morning. Daniel's smile tightened. It's better if we in the morning, I repeated, and slipped the folder into my bag. Antonio looked between us, his brows drawing together slightly, but he said nothing. Outside, the night air was sharp with salt and the faint temps of seaweed. I walked slowly to my car, the folder heavy in my bag, the weight of it pressing against my side like a reminder. My phone buzzed as I unlocked the door. Elaine's reply was brief. Call me tonight. Don't sign anything. I sat behind the wheel. For a moment, the engine idling, the restaurant's lights spilling onto the sidewalk behind me. Inside, Daniel would be making explanations, smoothing egos, perhaps spinning a new story to replace the one that had just been interrupted. But the agreement was in my possession now, and for the first time that evening, I felt the current shift under my feet. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the cold air clear my head. The ocean to my right was a dark, restless mass, each wave pulling something unseen from the shore. Somewhere in that rhythm was the patience I would need. Tonight, Daniel thought he had nudged me into place. Tomorrow, he would learn I wasn't in the game to be moved. The next morning, the tide was out, leaving the harbor bare and glistening in the pale light. I set the folder from the night before on my kitchen table, poured a cup of coffee, and read every line slowly. The more I read, the clearer it became that this was no simple catering agreement. It tied Antonio's services and my Dock Street property into a financing plan for a hospitality expansion I'd never heard of. The payment schedule and collateral clauses were precise, and my name was printed in 3 separate places. Someone had gone to the trouble of making it look as if I had already agreed in principle. By the time I reached the last page, the coffee was cold. I picked up my phone and dialed Elaine Porter. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk, but friendly. Iris, I saw your message. You have the document in front of you. I do, I said, and described what I was looking at. There was a pause, and then Elaine's tone shifted. That shell corporation is registered to a holding company Daniel controls. If you sign, you give them permission to use your property as a pledged asset, and it's not just for the catering. There's a cross-default clause. If any part of the deal fails, the property can be claimed to satisfy the debt. I took a slow breath. So it's a net, not a rope. Exactly, she said. And there's another layer. The address you see on page 2. That's tied to a separate lease you own. If they move operations there without your consent, you'd be in breach with your current tenant. They could sue you. The line was quiet for a moment, except for the faint hum of her office. Then Elaine asked, Did you tell Daniel you'd sign? I told him I'd read it in the morning, I said, which is now. Good. Don't sign. I'll pull the full corporate filings. And Iris, watch what you say to him for now. After we hung up, I stared out the window at the gulls wheeling over the pier. My mind went to the set of cups Antonio had served dessert in. I still had the original inventory list for that wedding gift. If those pieces were part of the lease inventory, they could connect directly to my landlord rights. That connection was older than some of Daniel's staff, and it was on paper. Late in the afternoon, I decided to visit the Dock Street building. The tenant, a quiet man named Frank Doyle, was restocking shelves when I walked in. Haven't seen you in a while, Ms. Caldwell, he said, smiling faintly. He was careful with his words, always had been. You here to inspect? Just checking in, I replied. My eyes moved to the corner display, where a familiar cobalt-glazed serving bowl sat, that still draws customers. People love it, Frank said. I keep it up front. He hesitated, then added, You know, Someone came by last week asking about the place, said they were scouting for a renovation, thought they were with you. They weren't, I said. My voice didn't change, but inside something tightened. Back home, I found the old lease file in a box in my hall closet. The paper smelled faintly of dust, but the signature on the last page was mine, the clauses intact. The subleasing restriction was in bold. I set it beside the folder from Daniel's dinner. Together, they told the story Daniel would rather no one else hear. That evening, Lydia called. Her tone was light, almost rehearsed. Just checking in, Iris. Daniel said you took the folder home. We want to make sure it didn't confuse you. It's very clear, I said. She laughed softly, the way people do when they want you to feel at ease. You know, these things can be tricky. Sometimes it's better to let us handle the details. It takes the pressure off you. I'm not under pressure, I said. Not yet. There was a pause. Well, we'll see you at the brunch on Sunday. We can sort everything out then. Sunday came with a sharp wind off the water. The brunch was at Daniel's first restaurant, smaller, but still crowded. Antonio was there again, moving between tables with the ease of someone who knew he was part of the draw. When he stopped by mine, his expression softened. You remember the first set I bought from you? He asked quietly. I do, I said. I also remember the invoice number. He blinked, then gave a small nod. Daniel says, this project will be good for everyone, but I think you should read all of it yourself. I have, I said. And I will again. Across the room, Daniel was talking with Harold Bennett. Both glanced my way more than once. Eventually, Daniel came over, carrying a slim envelope. This is the updated agreement, he said. We've simplified it for you. I took it but didn't open it. Simplified how? Less legal jargon, same intent, he said. It's a formality, Mom. Sign it and we can lock in Antonio's schedule. I looked at Antonio, who was watching from a few feet away. And if I don't? Daniel's smile thinned. Then we delay. And delay costs money. I slid the envelope into my bag. Then you'll have to factor that into your plan. By the time I left, I knew two things. Daniel was in deeper than he admitted, and he needed my signature not just for show. Whatever he was building, it rested on a foundation he couldn't legally touch without me, and that was something I intended to keep exactly where it was. 2 days after the brunch, I walked into the lobby of the Coastal Business Association, its polished brass letters catching the pale autumn light. Harold Bennett was leaning over the reception desk, chatting with the secretary. He straightened when he saw me, his expression a mix of surprise and formality. Harold had known my family for decades. He'd bought anniversary gifts from my shop more than once. But today, his handshake was cooler. Iris, he said, his voice steady but clipped. Wasn't expecting to see you here. Daniel mentioned you might be taking a step back from things. I must have missed the meeting where that was decided, I replied. I need 10 minutes of your time. We sat in his office, the walls lined with photographs from fundraisers and ribbon cuttings. I placed a copy of the Dock Street lease on his desk, the sublease clause highlighted in yellow. Has Daniel spoken to you about this property? Harold shifted in his chair. He's floated the idea of relocating some operations there. Said you were supportive. I haven't agreed to anything, I said. And if he moves in without my consent, he'll be violating a legally binding agreement. You should know that. He frowned, fingers drumming on the armrest. There's a lot of excitement about what Daniel's planning. Some of us have skin in the game, and some of you will be left holding the bag if it goes wrong, I said evenly. You've seen deals collapse before, Harold. You know, the signs. Before he could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Tommy. Need to talk. Alone. I found him an hour later, in the back lot behind a cafe. He was pacing, hands deep in his jacket pockets. Aunt Iris, he began, avoiding my eyes. I didn't know how far he was taking it. Daniel promised me a stake in the new venture if I could get you to sign. Said it was just to save time. And I asked. And now I hear there's more money from people he hasn't paid back. Promises he can't keep. He's using your name to make it look safe. I think Lydia's been feeding him details from your accounts. The wind picked up, rattling the cafe's dumpster lids. I studied his face, saw the worry there, the unease that comes when loyalty meets truth. You've given him information about my lease, I said. His silence was answer enough. Then you're going to help me fix it, I said, quietly. That evening I attended a reception at Harold's request. The room was crowded with local business owners and a few of Daniel's investors. Lydia was there in a sleek navy dress, moving from group to group with a glass of champagne. When she reached me, her smile was warm, her words coated in sugar. "Iris, I'm glad you came. It's important people see we're united." "Is that what they see?" I asked. Daughter eyes narrowed just a fraction before she turned to greet someone else from across the room. Daniel caught my eye and lifted his glass. Beside him stood Antonio, chatting with the man I recognized from the bank's lending office. I made my way over. "Mom," Daniel said smoothly, "I was just telling Martin here about our expansion. He's eager to move things along." Martin offered a polite smile. "Daniel says you're the final piece. Once your authorization comes through, we can release the funds." I let the pause hang, then said, "No authorization will be signed until I've reviewed every detail with my counsel." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I said. "If you're going to use my name in public, you'll hear my answer in public." The conversation died around us. Antonio glanced between us, something unreadable in his eyes. Martin excused himself. Daniel lowered his voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Good," I said, and walked away. Later, near the coat check, Antonio approached me. "I'm not blind," he said quietly. "I can see he's pressuring you. I don't know the full story, but I know when someone's overreaching. If you need information about the supplier contracts, I can get it." I considered him for a moment. "Bring me whatever you have that mentions Dock Street, and don't tell Daniel." When I stepped outside into the cold night, Tommy was waiting. "By my car, I found something," he said, pulling a folded sheet from his pocket. It was a schedule of payments Daniel owed to a private lender, amounts far larger than I'd imagined, several of them listing my property as implied collateral. I took the paper, feeling the weight of it in my hand. "This stays between us," I said, "until I decide otherwise." He nodded. The moon was thin over the water as I drove home. In the passenger seat, the lease copy, Tommy's paper, and Antonio's impending file formed a quiet stack of leverage. Daniel thought he was building momentum. What he didn't see was that the ground under his feet had already started to shift. The rain had set in by late morning, steady and cold, blurring the outlines of the harbor from my kitchen window. I had just finished sorting the lease documents into a single envelope when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Iris Caldwell," the voice asked, bright and practiced. "This is Monica Graves from the Coastal Chronicle. I'm working on a feature about local entrepreneurs and community investment. Your son Daniel came up in our research, and your name." I knew Monica's byline. She was the sort who could turn a minor zoning request into a 3-day headline. "And what exactly has my name to do with it?" I asked. "Well," she said carefully, "I've been hearing from several sources that your property on Dock Street is being integrated into a major hospitality venture. There's talk that you've stepped aside, and Daniel's assuming full control to modernize operations." The phrasing was neat, but the undertone was clear. Someone had been feeding her a version of the story, one where I was already out of the picture. "I haven't stepped aside from anything," I said, "and as for modernization, that property has been running perfectly well without it for decades." She paused, as if measuring the weight of my words. "Would you like to go on record about your involvement, or about your son's plans?" "I'd like to see your notes first," I said, "and the names of these sources." "That's not standard practice," she replied, "but I can tell you this much. The same people also mentioned concerns about your health, that you might not be able to handle complex business decisions anymore." The air in my kitchen seemed to sharpen. "I'll tell you what I can handle, Ms. Graves. I can handle watching my own back, and I intend to." After she hung up, I sat for a moment, the click of the rain against the glass like a slow metronome. Lydia's hand was all over this choice of words, the quiet implication that I was too frail for my own affairs. Daniel might have planted the seed, but Lydia knew how to water it in the right ears. By early afternoon, I had decided to meet Monica in person. We arranged to sit down at the Chronicle's small office, the kind of place that smelled faintly of newsprint and burnt coffee. Monica was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a quick smile that didn't quite reach them. She slid a folder across the desk. "These are the public records I pulled," she said. "2 corporate filings, both in the past month, both with your name listed as a guarantor. And here," she tapped a printout, "is a catering contract linking Antonio Russo's business to a holding company tied to your son. I skimmed the pages, each line confirming what Elaine had warned me, but seeing it through a reporter's lens made it starker. The public trail already showed me as a silent partner in Daniel's venture. You published this, I said, and you're handing him exactly what he wants, a facade of unity. Monica leaned back. Maybe, or maybe it shows there's more to the story. If you talk, you can shape it. I didn't commit, but I left, with copies of her records. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving the streets slick and reflective. I walked 2 blocks to Elaine's office, where she scanned the documents quickly. He's moving fast, she said. This second filing, if it stands, it could be used to justify transferring operational control without your consent. He's creating a paper trail that makes it look like you agreed months ago. Then we erase the trail, I said. Elaine's mouth curved faintly. Or, we write a better one. That evening, I went to Daniel's restaurant without calling ahead. It was early enough that the dinner crowd hadn't arrived, and the bar was quiet. Antonio was at a corner table, reviewing menus. He looked up, surprised. Iris, he said, standing. You don't usually come by unannounced. I don't usually have reason to, I said, but I've seen the filings. I've seen the contracts. My name is all over them, and I didn't put it there. He glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me. I only know what Daniel's told me, that you're part of this, that you're backing the expansion. I assumed. Don't assume, I cut in. If you have any paperwork that mentions my property, my signature, anything tying me to this deal, you bring it to me. Quietly, he hesitated, then nodded. There's an inventory list in the supplier file. It might matter to you. I'll get it. As I left, Lydia was coming in, her coat still damp from the rain. She stopped, that perfect hostess smile fixed in place. Mother, what a surprise. Did you come to see Daniel? I came to see the chef, I said. He's the one people remember when the food is good. Her smile faltered. Just slightly. Well, it's nice to know you're taking an interest. People have been wondering what I ask, just whether you're keeping up with all these changes. She let the implication hang like a perfume in the air. When I got home, the phone was ringing. It was Harold Bennett. Iris, I'm hearing from the association that you might be backing out of your commitments. That's not like you. I haven't backed out of anything, Harold, I said. And I haven't committed to anything, either, not in writing, not in word. If someone tells you otherwise, you come to me first. After we hung up, I spread the papers from Monica's folder across my dining table. The filings, the contracts, the clauses, they were threads. In a net Daniel was tightening around me. But now, I had copies. And soon, thanks to Antonio, have the piece that tied it all together. The inventory list with the Blue Wave patent cups. The proof that Dock Street was more than just a building in his plan. The rain started again as I gathered the papers into a single stack. Outside, the streetlights glowed in the wet, their reflections breaking on the pavement. Daniel wanted to paint me out of the picture, but before he finished his canvas, I intended to take the brush from his hand. I had no intention of waiting for Daniel's next move. By now, the pieces were on the table, contracts with my name, investors convinced I was behind him, a whisper campaign about my declining capacity. All of it pointed to the same goal: box me into a corner, take what he needed, and leave me with the fallout. If he was going to play a quiet game, I would play one quieter, but sharper. I called Elaine just after sunrise. I want to stop, put on anything that can be executed under my name, I told her. Bank accounts, property records, vendor agreements, everything. I don't care if it's inconvenient. She didn't hesitate. We can set up a verification clause. Anything tied to you needs to be confirmed face-to-face or on a secure video call. Without that, no one can claim you agreed. By mid-afternoon, the paperwork was done. My signatures were verified, the stipulations filed. Daniel could push whatever documents he wanted across whatever table he pleased. But without me looking into a camera and saying yes, nothing would clear. That evening, I dropped by the Dock Street building under the pretense of bringing Frank a box of holiday candles. He was locking up, the front window glowing with warm light. Ms. Caldwell, he said, surprised. Everything all right? I wanted to see the space, I said, and to remind you if anyone comes asking about renovations or taking over the lease, you call me before you answer. He nodded slowly. A couple of fellows stopped by last week, said they were with your son. I told them to talk to you directly. You did right, I said, handing him the candles. Keep doing that. From there, I went straight to Antonio's apartment above the smaller of Daniel's restaurants. He opened the door with a wary look, but let me in. The place smelled faintly of garlic and simmering stock. I found the supplier file you asked about, he said, handing me a manila envelope. The inventory list is inside. It's got those Blue Wave cups on it, linked to the Dock Street address. I don't know how he plans to use that, but it's in there. I flipped through until I saw the line item. 6 porcelain cups, Blue Wave glaze stored at Dock Street. There it was, in black and white. Those cups weren't just dishes, they were an anchor to the lease terms. Something only I could authorize for commercial use. Keep this between us, I told him. If he asks, you gave me nothing. Antonio studied me. He's in deep, isn't he? Deep enough to start making mistakes, I said. The next morning Daniel called. His voice was smooth, but tight around the edges. Mom, there's a timing issue. We need your authorization on a revised agreement by Friday, or Antonio's calendar for the spring gets locked up. Then, it gets locked up, I said. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Don't be stubborn. This is for the family. Family doesn't put each other in breach of contract, I said. There was a long silence. Then the line went dead. 2 days later, Elaine called with news. Your clause worked, she said. Daniel tried to process a lease modification yesterday. The bank flagged it, called my office. Without your video confirmation, it stalled. I could picture him, in some office, pen in hand, blinds half closed, watching his plan grind to a halt. But stalling him was only the beginning. That weekend, the Coastal Business Association hosted a gala at the Civic Center. Harold Bennett insisted I attend for optics, he'd said, but I had another reason. Daniel would be there with his investors, expecting to parade me as a figurehead. Instead, I arrived early, carrying the supplier list in my handbag. I found Harold near the stage, already surrounded by members. Harold, I said, did you know Daniel's expansion plan relies on materials stored at a property he doesn't control? He frowned. He told me everything was locked in. Then he didn't tell you the truth. I showed him the inventory line, my name tied to the address. Without my consent, this clause in the Dock Street lease voids his ability to use those assets. If his deal hinges on them, it's dead in the water. Harold's mouth tightened. That's not the picture he's been painting. That's the real one, I said. By the time Daniel arrived, the room was buzzing with side conversations. I watched from across the floor as Harold pulled him aside, the easy smile on Daniel's face faltering. Investors drifted away in small knots, leaving him standing with a drink he didn't seem interested in finishing. I didn't approach him, not yet. It was enough to know the quiet conditions I'd set had already turned his momentum into sand underfoot. He had built a brick by brick, on my name, and now, without my voice to seal it, every part of it was beginning to crack. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked in among the usual utility bills and charity flyers. My name was printed in heavy block letters, but the sender's address was a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice of pending litigation. An investor in Daniel's project claimed I was a co-guarantor on a loan now in default. I read it twice before setting it on the kitchen table. This was the chain reaction I'd expected. Daniel had leveraged my name in ways that looked clean on the surface, but the moment his financing collapsed, my signature real or fabricated would be dragged into the wreckage. The clock had started ticking, and if I didn't move quickly, I'd be in court defending myself from obligations I never agreed to. I called Elaine immediately. They're trying to pull me into a breach, I told her. I've seen the filing, she said. The good news is, your verification clause means they can't produce a lawful signature. The bad news is, they're counting on public pressure to make you settle quietly. Then we won't do it quietly, I said. That afternoon, I went to see Harold Bennett. He was at his office overlooking the marina, a place dressed in dark wood and framed photographs from Chamber of Commerce events. Harold, I said, laying the letter on his desk. I need you to read this. He scanned the first page, his brow furrowing. Daniel said you were fully behind him on this venture. He told you what he needed you to hear. What you're looking at is an attempt to make me pay for a risk I never took. And if they succeed with me, they'll succeed with others. Harold sat back, weighing my words. What are you asking me to do? Call a special meeting of the association, I said. Invite the press. Let's get every stakeholder in the same room and put the facts in daylight. He hesitated, but could ruin him or save him from worse, I said. By Saturday evening, the Civic Center was booked. Monica Graves, the community reporter, agreed to cover it, though she admitted she was also following up on rumors Lydia had been spreading about me. "I'd rather hear your side on record," Monica said. When the day came, the room was full business owners, local officials, even some of Daniel's restaurant staff. I took the stage with Elaine beside me. In my hand was a slim folder. The supplier list with my property's address, the flagged lease modification, and the investor's letter. "I've been accused of guaranteeing a loan I never authorized," I told the crowd. "My name was used without my consent, and my property tied to a deal that is now collapsing. The documents you see here show why that is impossible." Elaine stepped forward to explain the verification clause and the absence of any valid video confirmation. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Daniel walked in midway, wearing a suit that didn't quite hide the strain in his posture. "Mom," he said from the back, "this isn't the place for." "It's exactly the place," I cut in. "You've traded on my name for leverage. Now you can stand here and face the people you assured." He glanced toward Harold, perhaps hoping for an intervention, but Harold stayed seated. Monica's camera lens followed him as he moved closer to the front. "You're making this public?" he asked quietly. "You made it public when you tied my assets to your creditors," I said. The meeting broke into questions, some directed at me, others at Daniel. Investors asked why he hadn't disclosed the verification clause. Suppliers wanted to know about unpaid invoices. He tried to answer, but without the foundation he'd built on my apparent consent, his responses sagged under their own weight. By the end of the evening, the narrative had shifted. I was no longer the silent partner, or the frail mother unaware of her own affairs. I was the woman who had stopped the faulty deal from dragging the town into legal quagmire. That night, Elaine called with one more development. "One of the creditors is ready to sell Daniel's debt at a steep discount," she said. "If you acquire it through a holding company, you'll have leverage without him knowing until it's too late." I looked at the letter still lying on my kitchen table. "Make the arrangements," I told her. The next move would not be about defending my name. It would be about owning the very ground Daniel thought he was standing on. Elaine's voice on the phone was steady but carried an undercurrent of anticipation. "It's finalized," she said. "Through the holding company, you now own the controlling portion of Daniel's outstanding debt. He owes you, even if he doesn't know it yet." I let that sink in for a breath. This was no longer about shielding myself from his missteps. It was about placing him in a position where the only way forward ran directly through me. I asked Elaine to keep it quiet until I was ready. She agreed, reminding me that timing would decide whether this cut clean or left a scar he'd carry for the rest of his career. The next step was to see Antonio. His contract for the launch event at Daniel's new restaurant had clauses most people wouldn't notice, clauses that gave him the right to walk if payment terms weren't met. I found him in the test kitchen, slicing through a slab of swordfish with the same precision he applied to contracts. "Antonio," I said, "has Daniel paid you in full for the opening?" He set down his knife. "Not yet. He promised a transfer by Monday." "Should I be worried?" "That depends on whether you'd prefer to work for someone who pays their bills, or someone who assumes you'll stay out of loyalty." He studied me for a moment. "You have an alternative in mind?" "I have the funds ready to underwrite a dinner, any dinner under your terms. If you want to cook for people who appreciate your craft without the shadow of a collapsing deal, you'll have my full support. But if you stay tied to Daniel's launch, you'll be stepping into a storm he hasn't warned you about." Antonio wasn't a man who liked being cornered, but he liked deceit even less. "Send me the details," he said. By Tuesday morning, word had begun to leak, not from me, but from suppliers who had been told their invoices would be handled after the opening. Harold called, half accusing, half intrigued. "Are you moving against your son?" "I'm moving to protect my name," I said. "If that happens to intersect with his lessons in responsibility, so be it." That evening, Monica showed up at my door with a recorder and a notebook. "You should know Lydia's been telling people you're trying to sabotage Daniel out of jealousy. She says you can't stand to see him succeed without you. Then, she's going to have an even harder time explaining why Chef Antonio is cooking at a private charity dinner the same night as Daniel's launch." I said, "Would you like a seat at that table, Monica?" Her pen froze mid-sentence. "Are you serious? As a heart attack?" The day of the launch arrived with a sharp wind off the water. Daniel's restaurant was dressed for success: white linen, candles, a waiting list that stretched for weeks. But the kitchen was a different scene. Antonio's sous chefs had packed their knives the night before, quietly exiting under the cover of closing prep. By noon, Daniel was on the phone to every freelancer he could find, but it was too late. While he scrambled, the charity dinner took shape across town in a historic hall. The guest list was a who's who of the community's decision-makers, including those Daniel had tried to court. Antonio moved through the kitchen like a conductor, each plate leaving the pass a testament to precision and care. I stayed mostly in the background, greeting guests, making sure every donor knew their contribution would go toward the Community Arts Fund initiative. Daniel had dismissed as Laura-turned sentiment. Halfway through the evening, Harold approached me with a glass of wine. "You've done more than just protect yourself," he said. "You've shifted the center of gravity in this town." I glanced at the long table where Monica sat, recording remarks from patrons praising the dinner and Antonio's artistry. "Gravity needed shifting," I said. By the time dessert was served, I knew Daniel's opening was in chaos. The first diners had walked out after learning the menu had been slashed to whatever his remaining staff could manage. Lydia had been seen arguing with the hostess, her voice rising above the clink of glasses. When the last guest left our hall, I stepped outside into the cold air. My phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "What did you do?" he demanded. His voice was tight, brittle. "I ensured a successful evening for people who keep their word," I said. "And for the record, I now hold your debt. From here on, your obligations to me are not a matter of family, they're contractual." There was a pause long enough to hear the wind over the line. "You can't." "I can," I said, "and I have." I ended the call before he could rally. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when a storm passes but leaves the air charged. Inside my coat pocket, I felt the smooth curve of the ceramic wave pattern on the small keepsake from my mother's workshop. That piece had seen decades of community events, weathered changes in fortune, and remained intact. So would I, and this time, the terms would be mine. Daniel arrived at my doorstep 2 days later, without warning. His coat was unbuttoned, his tie knotted carelessly, and for the first time in years, his eyes didn't carry that calculating shine. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man after a long day's work, but the tired of someone who had been cornered and could no longer pretend otherwise. He didn't ask to come in. Instead, he stood in the doorway and held out a folder. Inside were signed acknowledgments of debt repayment monthly installments. Interest outlined, every clause exactly as Elaine had written it. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting the weight of each signature register. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm here because I can't move forward without fixing this. And because I was wrong." His voice caught on that last word. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't rehearsed. It was the voice of a man realizing there was no deal, no charm, no performance that could soften the facts. I nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where, years ago, I'd helped him with homework, where he'd practiced speeches for school debates, where we'd shared meals in the days before his ambition began to outgrow his sense of loyalty. "You've built your life on the assumption that you can always find a way around people," I said. "You can't do that here anymore." He rubbed his forehead. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness right away." "I'm not offering it," I replied. "This is a contract, not a reunion. You'll pay what you owe. You'll honor the agreement, and you'll stay out of my affairs unless invited. That's how this works now." He nodded once. No argument, no sigh of relief, just acknowledgement. He left the signed papers and walked back to his car. I didn't watch him drive away. Later, that week, I brought the Seawave ceramic vase down from its place on the shelf. It had survived decades' fires in other people's homes, storms that rattled the gallery windows, and careless hands who didn't understand its value. I cleaned the dust from its ridges and set it on the table during my meeting with Harold and a few other community leaders. They knew the story of the vase, but more importantly, they knew the story it now represented, that the charity dinner had funded the first phase of the new community arts wing. Antonio had agreed to oversee the kitchen for its opening night, and Monica's article in the paper tied the project directly to the economic revival of the town. Daniel's name didn't appear anywhere in the coverage. Not out of spite, out of accuracy. He hadn't been part of it. For the first time in years, I felt no need to defend myself against his version of events. The facts, the paper trail, and the community's memory had aligned. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. When the contracts were filed and the dinner plans finalized, I took a walk down to the pier. The tide was coming in, steady and unhurried. I thought about how much of this fight had been spent quietly watching, waiting, choosing the moment. Not every battle is won by pushing forward. Sometimes it's won by standing still until the other side moves into the space you've prepared. Looking back, the lesson was clearer than anything else. Family will test you in ways strangers never could, because they know exactly where the cracks are. If you hand them your trust without boundaries, they will use it as leverage. Blood doesn't entitle anyone to a free pass on respect. The moment you tie your survival to their approval, you've already given up control. The only way to stay whole is to protect your ground legally, financially, and personally before the storm hits. To those listening who have been pushed aside, spoken over, or made into a prop in someone else's ambitions, don't wait for an apology to reclaim what's yours. Take back your place, not with shouting, but with certainty. Know the terms, write them down, and never let them be rewritten without your hand on the pen. I've crossed my last bridge with Daniel, on his terms. The road ahead will be on mine. And if my story helps even one of you stand your ground before it's too late, then it's worth telling. If you've followed me through this, thank you. Stay with me for the next chapter, I promise. The fight for what's yours never ends, but neither does the satisfaction of winning it.